In the drama, we see the emotional violence of white women, the terror of self-pitying white men, a real-life tragedy that is somehow reduced to wild hypotheticals, insensitivity to actual victims, and the erasure of black women and girlhood. Reality. This is our everyday life, and so when this movie explores the worst things we've done, I ask, why is it that black women are reduced to our worst moments when everyone else is freed of theirs? In a post-cancel culture world, we're obsessed with accountability for others, but unable and unwilling to hold ourselves to those same standards. But there is an ethical threshold that is hard to come back from. A functioning society should adhere to some type of moral code, but that code is different for black women from the start. And in the drama, we watch as white characters confess acts of cruelty, violence, and harm, yet still retain their humanity, their nuance, and ultimately their forgiveness. This imbalance is not accidental, by the way. It mirrors a broader social reality. Black women are not afforded the same grace, the same room for error, or the same ability to be seen as fully human. And so instead, we are flattened into our worst moments while others are allowed to move beyond theirs. And so this raises the critical question that I'm going to be discussing in this video. Who is actually being held accountable and who is being protected? Because if morality were truly universal, it would not bend so easily along racial and gendered lines. And as you know, this video will discuss the drama, but this is not a film review, by the way. I actually want to discuss more about how the characters interact and how this is a broader representation of black women. I am going to talk about Zendaya in depth, where she lies in Hollywood, how Hollywood interacts with her and wants to represent blackness on the screen by using her. There's been other videos where I've dipped in and out of talking about her, but nah, this is the Zendaya video. So I hope you enjoy this video. Please do like, comment, and subscribe. Before we start, I want to say thank you so much, guys. I have passed, not even hit, but passed 1,000 subscribers. Yeah, I kind of can't believe it, but I'm always trying to improve my work and be more political and skeptical about things. Stack at Serene the Journalist, and I write more frequently on there more than these videos because these videos take long. I am Serene the Journalist, and we're just gonna get right into it. In the film, Emma, played by Zendaya Coleman, is a biracial woman who works at Mission Books alongside her friend Rachel, played by Alana Hames. The film quickly shows the dynamic between Emma and Rachel early on. Emma, teary-eyed, has just finished reciting her vows to Rachel, but Rachel condescendingly tells Emma that she is an ugly crier and berates her for having her first relationship and falling in love at 28 years old. I don't know why it's necessary, but okay. Maybe 20 minutes in the film, with Charlie, played by Robert Pattinson, Emma, Mike, played by Madamu Athie, and Rachel. Mike starts off first by revealing he once used his mean ex-girlfriend as a human shield against a rabid dog. Next to go after is Rachel, who describes locking her disabled neighbor in a closet in the woods and leaving him there overnight. To me, Rachel had the most disturbing revelation the whole evening, and yet somehow developed a newfound moral superiority. It wasn't great. We see Charlie, who goes on to say that he once cyberbullied someone so badly in school that the child moved schools. And then lastly, it's Emma's turn, where she said that she planned to do basically a school shooting when she was 15. And the whole scene is just distasteful. Mike, a black man, came to defense of both Charlie and Emma through their barring of secrets, but immediately sided with his white partner who felt threatened. Rachel is straight away recognisable to the audience as a specific kind of neoliberal white woman, an upper class daughter of privilege who, cannot possibly be racist because she dates a black man. Where have we seen that before? And she never actually considers what her reaction to Emma reveals about her. She's also objectively worse than Emma, who essentially reveals a troubling mental health episode from her childhood, yet one that did not result in actual loss and harm, except through herself, through her hearing loss. But Rachel, on the other hand, fully tortured a child, nearly killing him, and yet does everything in her power to convince her social circle that Emma is the monster. Bruh. She revels in her own moral superiority over Emma, and she reminds me of those sarcastic friends that we probably all had who would get at you for everything you did and then cast it off as humour. When I tell you, I experienced this in secondary school. Going to a secondary girls' school, by the way, is not for the weak. This can normally be a reaction through aggression and anger when met with confrontation, but Emma doesn't do this. She actually does the opposite. But with Rachel, her rudeness came off quite violent. It's a microaggression. What is a microaggression? A microaggression, in this case racial microaggression, refers to subtle yet psychologically injurious interpersonal experiences rooted in racial and gender oppression. It's also brief everyday interactions that send degenerating messages to a person because they belong to a racially minoritized group. Compared to more overt forms of racism, racial microaggressions are subtle and insidious, often leaving the victim confused, distressed, and frustrated, and the perpetrator oblivious to the offense they have caused. Microaggressions are subtle insults hidden in daily interactions that are directed to minorities automatically or unconsciously. And I want to make it very clear that the perpetrator of the microaggression may not always have any harassing and mean intent. And a lot of the time, the outcome of whoever this harassment leads to depends on the effect it had on the victim. Intent is not the same as impact, and a throwaway comment or joke can have a huge impact on another person. And so it's everyone's responsibility to think about the impact that their words or actions might have on someone else. In the article, Gendered Racial Microaggressions and Black Women's Mental Health, Does Life Core Stage Matter? The authors found that gendered racial microaggressions are most salient among relatively younger Black women between 18 and 29 years old. However, middle-aged 46 to 64-year-olds Black women are not psychologically affected by specific kinds of gendered racial microaggressions. This can happen in work, education, social groups, and it's rarely ever discussed. It isn't racism per se, but we can say that racism births it, and it latches onto negative stereotypes of that person because of that race, and allows for that perpetrator to interact with that person differently without outwardly being racist. As many as 50% or more of African Americans have experienced being racially discriminated against as a result of microaggression encounters. And in the UK, Black professionals experience 13 microaggressions more frequently than their white and Asian colleagues do. Acts that underestimate, invalidate, and tokenize them, among others. But many people see microaggressions as compliments and therefore do not understand the harm in them. Let me be very clear. These ain't compliments, okay? You may think they're compliments, but they're not. Okay, they're not. It's just not. So if you don't know, here are some examples so we all understand what a microaggression is. You're so articulate. This is framed as a phrase, but it implies surprise that a Black woman can speak well, reinforcing the stereotype that she wasn't expected to. Another one we've all heard, you're pretty for a Black girl. This positions Blackness as a negative baseline and suggests that her beauty is an exception rather than a normal. And so the hostility from Rachel can be for many Black women a sort of trigger, but we've been treated by our white counterpeers in these spaces. To the viewer, Rachel represents a bitter white woman who has never lost to a Black woman. Her having a Black husband, Mike, only furthers this notion. No one calls her a Karen, though there is a clear racist undertone and aesthetic to Rachel delighting in publicly humiliating a Black woman. The director, Christopher Borgli, who is Norwegian, I think really captures the genuine vilification Black women are subjected to by white women, and at further extent Black men. And it is a constant persecution from everyone all the time. And so as a viewer, and also clearly a Black woman, I can emphasize with Emma in that moment. Even though Zendaya is biracial and there's a whole political world around that, in a white supremacist society that we have today, she's racialized as Black. And so for this video, I recently read an article titled, Across Racial Lines, Can We Be Friends? The writer writes, the power dynamics at play between white girls and women and Black girls and women leaves you open and vulnerable to friendships that are less than sincere and fraught with microaggressions. That's on a good day. On a bad day, well, you might find yourself in relationships with people who honestly lack any capacity to support you, or at times even understand you. We see this with Emma and Rachel particularly. And this is largely due to the power imbalance. White men have the most power, whereas Black women tend to have the least power. And therefore Black women are not seen as competition to them. In her book Communion, Bell Hooks talks about her friendship with her best friend who happened to be white. And she said, I was upset because she had not explained race and racism to her children. This oversight from a white woman whose best friend is Black. And I think it really showed that for Bell Hooks, a Black woman, she needed her friend to identify her as a Black woman and at least understand the racism and the microaggressions and how her experience as a Black woman would be totally different to her friend. Whether or not her friend would be able to empathize with that. Hooks wanted her friend to see her. And now I'm not saying that this refers to every white and Black friendship for anyone tries to comment me in the comments, but for some people this is a problem. And so many of us go into the movie thinking it's going to be a rom-com, but low-key I think it's also about how people can and will co-opt trauma in a way to secure and reinforce a supremacist social order. And so Rachel, practically repulsed by Emma because Rachel's cousin was paralyzed, uses this as a shield for her own moral void and a weapon she can use against Emma in the social circle.
And before anyone says, not everything is about race.
In this film it is, all right? Thank you. Because we see how a working class Black woman is punished and socially ostracized for what basically was a mental health crisis, while multiple privileged characters literally got away with actual life-ruining behavior. Penina Wangari Jones writes in the article, The Innocence of White Women, that the white woman's tears were both for the white woman and against the person who was making her uncomfortable, usually a person of color. In this way, their function is twofold. First, they recenter the white woman through her emotions and create feelings of empathy and compassion for the white woman. Consequently, race and racism are no longer the focuses. The white woman's emotions are. The second function of the white woman's tears is to shift the roles. If the white woman feels accused of racism, her tears turn the aggression towards the accuser. The one who is seen to have caused white woman's tears is now an abuser, a troll, a bully, a harasser, whatever you want to say. And if the individual who makes the white woman uncomfortable happens to be a woman of color, and especially a black woman, the binary victim/abuser will be reinforced. So there's no denying or ignoring that Emma is vulnerable to Rachel's social agenda because she is already othered in their world. She has less defenses from Rachel's attack, and we see how less people are willing to help her. This actually reminds me of a TV show called Little Fires Everywhere, which was inspired by the book by... I forgot her name. But the book is so good, guys. The book is so good. In it, there's a scene where Lexi Richardson lies and claims that her friend, Pearl, had an abortion when it was actually her. This vividly demonstrates racial power dynamics. Lexi positions herself as morally outraged and emotionally distraught, effectively shifting attention away from Pearl, the actual victim in this case, whose lived reality is erased. By leveraging her social credibility as a white girl, Lexi ensures that adults and peers are more likely to believe her over Pearl. And her emotional displays, crying and expressing shock, functions as a classic example of white woman tears, a tool that many people manipulate others into sympathy and protective responses, while casting Pearl, the black girl, as the antagonist despite her innocence. The scene underscores how white emotionality is socially prioritized and how black girls' experiences can be overwritten in both interpersonal and systemic ways, turning Pearl into a vessel for Lexi's performance of victimhood. Pearl actually accepts this, and it's actually Pearl's mom, Kay Washington, who sees through it and in her own way tries to take a stand. There's the same sort of imbalance we see in The Hate You Give. The racial power dynamic between Star and her friend Haley is revealed through moments where Haley minimizes and recenters Star's trauma. After Star witnesses a murder, Haley responds not with genuine understanding, but with defensiveness, bringing up all lives matter and dismissing Star's grief. In doing so, she shifts the conversation away from Star's lived experience dealing with police violence and towards her own comfort and perspective. This dynamic forces Star into a position of emotional labor where she must either educate Haley or suppress her feelings to maintain the friendship. Like many microaggressions, Haley's behavior is not overtly hostile, but is rooted in entitlement, the assumption that her viewpoint deserves equal or greater weight, even in situations where Star is the one directly impacted. So ultimately, the scene exposes how white girlhood is afforded the space to be ignorant, emotional, and centered, while black girlhood is expected to absorb harm quietly, reinforcing an unequal and deeply racialized friendship dynamic. Like, yeah, Sabrina Carpenter, she did play that character well. Real ones know Sabrina Carpenter before she blew up with her songs. She was a little child star back in the day. Little Fires Everywhere, the drama, and The Hate You Give exposes how racial power dynamics operate within friendships. In each case, Lexi or Haley centers her own feelings, whether through emotional manipulation or defensive ignorance, while the black girls, Pearl or Star or Emma, are pushed to the margins despite being the ones most affected. And I think in a post-colonial Western and predominantly white spaces, racism and white supremacy is less visible now because of anti-racist social movements that have made many people conscious of the fact that they were unacceptable. But I want to add that not seeing racism and white supremacy does not mean that they are not there, guys. Please, they may have just taken more subtle forms like innocence, microaggressions, and fragility, for example. They are still very much embedded in our systems. And a lot of the time we talk about toxic masculinity, but we never fully explore how toxic femininity is also wielded in a particular way. And even towards the end of the film, when Rachel was doing her annoying, quite rude and unnecessary speech, she tries to joke that Emma doesn't have any of her own friends. And I think it's this isolation that actually also caused this whole problem. In Communion, again, Bell Hooks wrote that lots of women can hang tight with one another and bond if one of them has a problem or if they share a problem. Affirming another woman's success is a difficult issue for many females. From girlhood on, females learn how to use terroristic tactics of exclusion, ostracism, and shunning to police one another. This is what Rachel does. She isolates Emma socially while disguising it as humor, reinforcing her outsider status. And rather than supporting Emma, Rachel uses subtle and humiliation and exclusion to assert control, demonstrating how female friendships can become sites of competition and policing rather than solidarity. In All About Love, bell hooks. Quick disclaimer, I have been reading bell hooks for like the last month, so she's gonna show up a lot in this video. She explains that you learn to mutually love from friendships, and that creates a positive foundation for all your human connections. Your friendships also teach you what you will and will not tolerate. Because if you won't tolerate an emotionally or physically abusive friendship, then you should use that same rationale in a romantic relationship. Our friendships overall teaches us a lot about connecting with others, so we need that learning experience. And I think the fact that Emma kind of puts up with a lot of what Rachel and Charlie put her through, which we'll go in a minute, is that she's never really had a healthy friendship where boundaries are set on both sides. And now she just tolerates everything for the sake of wanting to be loved in both a friendship and romantic way. And so before I talk about Charlie, I do want to highlight when Zendaya stands in Hollywood. As I mentioned earlier, I have spoken about her briefly of a video, but I did want to go into Zendaya in a more concrete and full depth analysis. I will say there is a video that I watched by Lani Lenz, who I think is great. Someone actually commented that we have similar styles, and yeah, she's doing her thing. Shout out Lani. But she also did a video about Zendaya, which is very great as well. Definitely look at it if you have time. Now, it goes without saying that Zendaya, as a black biracial woman, occupies a unique and often complicated space within Hollywood. While she is frequently celebrated as a symbol of black representation, the roles that she is offered and the roles that she continues to accept raise important questions about what that representation actually looks like. Across much of her filmography, Zendaya is consistently positioned as the only black woman in predominantly white spaces. And that's a pattern that shapes not only how her characters are written, but also how the audiences and us watching, particularly black audiences, are able to connect with her. For instance, in projects like Challengers and recently The Drama, her characters exist in worlds where race is either backgrounded or entirely ignored, despite the obvious racial dynamic at play. For instance, in Challengers, I remember her saying a comment like, "Oh, I'm here looking after my two white boys," to show that, yeah, we need to see this woman as a black character. And so she's often surrounded by white characters, romantic partners, friends, or social circles. Yet there's little to no exploration of how her identity as a black woman actually shapes her experiences within these environments. And so this creates a kind of race neutral presence that in reality is anything but neutral. Instead, it reflects a broader industry tendency to write whiteness as the default, with blackness existing only when explicitly addressed. And so for many, this recurring positioning can make it difficult for black audiences to fully embrace Zendaya as a representative figure. It's not a question of her identity, she is a black woman, but rather the lack of visible connections to the black community, culture, and relationality within her roles. Her characters are rarely shown in meaningful relationships with other black women, rarely embed in black social worlds, and rarely allowed to experience the fullness of black girlhood or womanhood on screen. And instead, they are often isolated figures navigating predominantly white environments without the grounding presence of community. I'm going to pause and say that I know when she started doing her own shows, such as Casey Undercover, which she produced, she allowed herself to have a black family, which is interesting because she is mixed race. And so that doesn't even represent her reality. And so I was confused as to why she didn't just stay true to herself in that role. But I understand that I think from her perspective, she wanted to showcase black talent, but still her being lighter skinned and at the face of that, the spotlight is still on her. Similar to when was cast as Denise in The Bill Cosby Show, her light complexion stood out compared to her on-screen family. I think there needs to be some sort of consistency with how she wants to portray herself. And so I think it's important that we realize that when she is cast in mainstream fields that are going to be blockbusters and in the cinemas everywhere, she's always cast in predominantly white spaces. And so that does lead to isolation, and the isolation is significant. Representation is not just about visibility, it is about depth, context, and relational experience. When a black woman is consistently portrayed without community, it subtly reinforces the idea that blackness can exist detached from a collective identity. And I think this also draws to how rich and successful Zendaya actually is. She has become one of the highest paid young actresses in Hollywood, making history by earning around $1 million per episode in For Euphoria. And this year, she's reportedly earning over $43 million, making her the highest paid black actress above Viola Davis, above Kerry Washington, above Taraji B. Henson. You name it, Zendaya is earning more than them. This positions her above many black actresses historically who have been often underpaid and overlooked within the industry. The Color Purple came out. Taraji P. Henson was vocal about the struggle she's had as an actress and continues to still have despite her extensive portfolio.
I'm just tired of working so hard, being gracious at what I do, getting paid a fraction of the cost. I hear people go, you work a lot. Well, have to. The math ain't mathin'.
And so this success for Zendaya highlights the tension. The black women who are able to reach this level of pay are often those who can be positioned within racially ambiguous or predominantly white narratives. And even like other black actresses who have grown up around the time or even before the time of Zendaya, they haven't even had as much mainstream success as her. Take China Anne McClain, Keke Palmer, Coco Jones. Even now, they're not in the same room that Zendaya is in. And respectfully, no one can tell me this isn't the reason. And I don't think it should be forgotten that just because we may look at Zendaya and say she's made it, a huge chunk of her counterparts haven't in that way. And so we know this, Zendaya knows this, but I don't really know what she's actually doing to help other black and upcoming creatives since, you know, a lot of the decisions that she has. I feel like she's had so much potential and so much time and has the platform to amplify other black voices, and but I haven't really seen her do that since Casey Undercover, and that came out 10 years ago. So maybe, you know, maybe it's not important to her anymore. And I want to be very clear, this is not to place blame on Zendaya solely. She knows this, as back in 2018 she said that she understood she was Hollywood's acceptable version of a black girl. The only one I've seen recently was like Malcolm Marie, and that was in 2020, and that was with Denzel Washington's son. That didn't even go to cinema, I don't think. I definitely think that was a low-key forgotten Netflix thing that we all just watched in lockdown. I'm also saying this because this is to critique the industry structures that shape these roles. However, as her platform and influence continues to grow, there is a expectation and a hope that she might take on projects that more fully explore black womanhood in all its complexities. And so ultimately the tension lies in this contradiction. Zendaya is a highly visible black star, yet the world she inhabits often feels disconnected from blackness itself. And so this disconnection becomes most prominent in the drama, where her character is explicitly the only black woman in a predominantly white social and professional environment. I do want to say that with this whole conversation, the way race operates in the United Kingdom and the United States are shaped by different historical, cultural, and social frameworks, which does lead to distinct racial dynamics despite both societies being structured by white supremacy. From what I believe in the United States, race is deeply rooted in the legacy of slavery and segregation, with black and white relations forming the central axes of racial discourse. The afterlives of slavery, including the Jim Crow laws and the civil rights movement, continue to shape how race is understood and discussed, making racism a more explicit and visible part of national conversation. But here, the UK's relationship with race is tied more closely to a history of empire, immigration, and colonialism, particularly through post-World War II migration, such as the Windrush generation. And as a result, race in the UK is often framed through questions of citizenship, belonging, and national identity, rather than a direct domestic history of segregation. Even though Britain was deeply involved in the transatlantic slave trade. This difference also affects how race is talked about. In the US, conversations about racism, I believe, tend to be more direct and openly acknowledged, whereas in the UK, there is often a tendency to minimize or deflect discussions of racism, with a common narrative suggesting that racism is worse in America. Guys, let me tell you, racism is unfortunately alive and kicking and well over here. And there was actually a video that I watched years ago. It was about the blue-eye test that I think Jane Elliott did. And if you watch it, you will just see how people in the UK really react and are really much defensive when it comes to racism in the UK, as if it doesn't exist. But if you know the politics over here, it does. This can make British racism even more insidious, as it is frequently denied or framed as isolated incidents rather than systemic issues. In the UK, identity is more fluid, with greater emphasis on ethnicity, nationality, and cultural background, i.e. Black British, Caribbean, Black African. And so this distinction becomes particularly important when considering where mixed race individuals sit within each context. Mixed race identity is more formally recognized and socially acknowledged as a distinct, often characterized separately, i.e. mixed or dual heritage. This can allow for a more flexible understanding of identity, but it can also create a sense of in-betweenness, where mixed race individuals may not feel fully accepted by either white or black community. But in both contexts, however, proximity to blackness still subjects mixed race people to anti-blackness, particularly when they have visible black features. While both nations produce complex and often difficult racial identities for mixed race individuals, the US tends to absorb them into blackness, whereas the UK more openly marks them as separate. Yet neither framework fully resolves the tensions of belonging, identity, and racialization. So when I'm speaking about black women and how they are treated, I wholeheartedly understand that Zendaya is an exception when it comes to black women and how black women are treated on a day-to-day basis. And when I'm saying black women in this movie, I'm using her as an example because in the movie, her dad is black. So they clearly want to show that there is some sort of racial dynamic there and that we should not see Emma as a sole white character. But I do understand that if someone like Keke Palmer was in this role and the exact same thing happened to her, we would be looking at this movie with a way more radical and racial lens, because a lot of people would be seeing how this black woman is being treated in a predominantly white environment. Now, let's talk about Mr. Charlie. Now, we can't discuss the movie without talking about romance, love. Don't get it twisted, guys. This is Charlie's story. Despite the marketing, advertising, and red carpet, Emma is not an equal character in this white male fantasy. I actually read a Substack that said she is an empty shell for Patterson's Charlie to rage against stretching the depths of his own humanity, love, and compassion. He's the only one in this story with an arc whose emotions are fully realized, who gets to be a human. As is typical for her at this point in her film career, Zendaya is a blank canvas for a white man's projections and emotional growth. In the film, Zendaya low-key doesn't have much to work with regarding her character, and casting her pushes this premise that is beyond the brink of believability and underscores the racism of the other characters. No one calls out the racism of Emma's husband-to-be for being terrified of this secretly angry black woman. I've spoken about the angry black woman in other videos, but if you haven't watched it, in the aftermath of slavery and the resulting social, economic, and political effects, black women have become the victims of negative stereotyping in mainstream culture. I want to say quickly that this doesn't just apply to American culture. Many cultures within the Western world put this stereotype onto black women when we feel like we can't even show any slight of negative emotion without seeming unreasonable or angry. And such stereotypes include the myth of the angry black woman that characterizes these women as aggressive, ill-tempered, overbearing, hostile, and ignorant without provocation. And let's be clear, I understand that Charlie would feel betrayed by not knowing the information that Emma shares, okay? I understand and I agree why he would be upset, all right? Like, I agree. Many people have gone back and forth about whether Rachel or Charlie is the villain in the story. Emma Beatty writes, as soon as she reveals the deepest, darkest parts of herself, he can't hang. Once his perception of his perfect life and perfect future wife has a crack, he loses it and goes so far as to cheat on her. What an attempt to work through his feelings. Revenge? Where's the excuse there? Charlie is in love with a mirage instead of who Emma actually is. When it comes to Emma, the movie shows her as a person who has done a lot of work to become a different person than the high school girl who was bullied and imagined doing something horrific in response. I think, in fact, that Emma says this in front of other people is sort of the reason why Charlie reacts the way he does, because he's the one trying to decide whether he wants to be with Emma after this, but also he's thinking about how other people are seeing him deciding to be with Emma after this. And I think Rachel's speech makes it very clear that she's not just judging Emma, but also judging Charlie. And Charlie doesn't want to be judged as someone who is basically an enabler or someone who is going to love someone else who thought about doing something horrific. In a book called The End of Manhood, a book for men of conscience, John Stoltenberg writes that learning to live as a man of conscience means deciding that your loyalty to people whom you love is always more important than whatever legal loyalty you may sometimes feel to other men's judgment on your manhood. And this is so important because we see how Charlie runs to his best friend Mike, who is trying to affirm his manhood and affirm what the right thing is and how he should respond. But as Stoltenberg says, you have loyalty to the people that you love, not to others who basically are there to stroke your ego or affirm your manhood to others. Maynard Maria Reich, in a passage from the classic Letters to a Young Poet, I recommend the book, you guys. I also read that last year. It's actually a book that Lauryn Hill reads in Sister Act 2. He says, for one human being to love another, that is perhaps the most difficult of all task, The ultimate, the last test and proof, the work for which all other work is but preparation. Love is not always easy, and the film states that time and time again, that true love is radical acceptance. Many of us don't have to radically accept love. For many of us, love can seem easy, and so when there is a big hurdle, we don't know what to do with it or how even to act. Bell Hooks argues that we fumble and falter at love largely because we are unclear of what it actually means and what it asks of us. Love isn't about certainty or even understanding everything. I believe it's just seeing someone fully and choosing them anyway. And for ages, that seems like something that Charlie can't do. I think he also doesn't want to see her not just as a woman, as his fiancée, but also a black woman. Even when he sees her as a sort of 15-year-old, he sees her as a child and not maybe the constraints that race has played a part in her childhood and her upbringing. This is where, to me, the film fails. There was no race-blind casting, by the way. It's a thing when everyone is written as white and when we're all watching white people gang on a black woman as if there are no racial dynamics at play. I low-key think it can be fair to say that the director was not 100% up to the task of tackling the racial imagery he was creating in the production of this film. And we see time and time again with Zendaya, which I think also says a lot about the roles she decides to take. There are also black men we see here. Yes, there is Mike, but he is equally racially unspecific, other than a throwaway line where Rachel shares her false belief that her black husband must have grown up around guns. Because the audience can see that he's black, she doesn't have to say it, and we know to gasp or laugh at such a crazy thing to say. And this is more evidence of the kind of people Emma is around. And she isn't part of any community and doesn't have her own community. And I think that is such a big thing for her in this movie, because she doesn't even have her own friends. Satisfying friendship in which we share mutual love provides a guide for behavior in other relationships, which includes romantic ones, and they all provide us with a way of knowing community and being accepted by community. And when Emma says that, she was bullied in school and felt lonely, and Charlie responds as if, oh, that's it? That's the excuse you're using? It says a lot about who he is. This is the same man who cyberbullied someone to the point that they moved away. And I think we really do disregard how black people and black girls are treated in Western schools and how black girls are forced to grow up way before their time. Loneliness is actually consistently linked to depression and depressive symptoms. According to the Black Women's Health Imperative, the number of black women who report feelings of depression is slightly higher than white women. 3.9% of black women report feelings of sadness compared to 2.9% of white women. And 2.4% of black women report feelings of hopelessness compared to 1.9% of white women. So we are literally seeing the statistics here, guys. And even when we think about how our education system, for example, in the US, according to a 2024 study from the US Government Accountability Office, black girls receive more frequent and more severe discipline in schools than other black girls. Black girls had higher rates of exclusionary discipline compared to white girls for similar behaviours such as defiance, disrespect, and disruption. The data also shows that in every state in the US, black girls are disciplined at higher rates. In the UK, a report came out last year which found that over 60% of black girls felt they were unjustly punished, with only 14% receiving specialist support incidents were escalated to senior management. And that furthermore, black girls were seen through a lens of defiance and aggression, which was found to be detrimental to their mental health and well-being. There's actually a 2019 movie called Rocks. The film follows Shola Rocks, a black British teenage girl in London whose mother suddenly disappears, leaving her to care for her younger brother. What's striking is how the school and why the system responds. Instead of immediately safeguarding her, Rocks goes largely unnoticed as she struggles to survive, skipping school and hiding her situation out of fear of being separated from her brother. Even when teachers become aware that something is wrong, the response feels procedural rather than protective, focused on reporting an intervention that could break up her family, rather than building trust and offering real support. This reflects a key issue in the educational system. And just speaking about this makes me think about Abbott Elementary and how I think Quinta Brunson does such a great job in trying to show how it's so easy for black school kids to slip through the crack and not be safely guarded. And I think the show just shows how much work needs to be done, but not just like the US educational system, but just wider educational systems in general, and how teachers really are a focal point for a lot of how children are going to grow up and think about school, and also think about how the adults around them have interacted with them. And this is a systemic institutional failure of protection from teachers to principals to school administrators, the most unprotected people on the planet would have a right to rage. And I'm so sure Charlie clearly doesn't know all this and can't see Emma truly. And probably I want to say the nicest thing that he did, which was ask her on behalf of his worry if she took therapy for it. And when Emma says no, it sort of ruins this whole idea that she isn't well and that he doesn't feel safe with her. The movie also tries to play on the idea that people think school shootings in the US are just so normalized and other people think it's not. And I think as a Brit, the same as Charlie. Charlie in the film was obviously British. To us over here, gun violence is crazy, by the way. Like, I actually can't believe that, like, guns are legally allowed in the US. Like, they are not allowed over here. And so when we do get news of gun violence, to me, it's insane. I'm like, what is going on? In the first year of the pandemic, when schools were closed, there was a major decline in gun violence incidents on school grounds. And since then, recent years saw a stark increase in school shootings, with 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024 all setting records since at least 2008. I read another article on Substack, you can tell I like Substack, that said the biggest elephant in the room, of course, makes the entire premise of the film fall apart. Black girls don't do school shootings. It's not a thing anywhere. But what would make a black girl plan a school shooting and then never follow through because this is some white boy would have been a fascinating undertaking. I was so interested in this, and so I did a little digging and found that between August 1982 and March 2026, 159 mass shootings were recorded in the United States. In 87 of them, the shooters were white. The perpetrator was black in 27 cases and Latino in 12. The percentage terms that amounted to about 55% white, 70% black, and 8% Latino. And then broadly speaking, the racial distribution of mass shootings mirrors the racial distribution of the US population as a whole. Furthermore, looking at this in the US, bi gender clearly demonstrates that the majority of mass shootings are carried out by men. We simply don't process anger in this way. We are much more statistically likely to be victims of violence rather than perpetrators of it. Yet the stereotypes of black women and girls as unrighteously angry, as violent, as hypermasculine, as strong enough to not need or deserve protection persists. It seems that in a world where Borgley is trying to open up a conversation of the United States in particular has caused a great deal of suffering and political angst, and is trying to make an overarching political statement about the American society from a more comfortable space. His engagement with the US culture and his choice to put Emma as a perpetrator of this crime is another known transgression. Chris Murphy says it feels like he set out to make the most provocative and boundary-pushing film he could do without stepping over the line into poor taste, positioning himself as a foreigner, examining America's relationship to school shootings and gun violence, intentionally poking the bear. So this film could have done a way better job at highlighting both the systemic failures that lead to the erasure of black girls' humanity at the crucial age of development and the root causes of mass shooting. It would have been nice to explore that mass shootings don't happen in a vacuum and are not solely an individual choice, but built on and sustained by violence. But the director decides to make a horror film where a biracial black woman is now trapped in a marriage with a man who harassed a woman in a wheelchair in the middle of the street, who also cyberbullied a kid until the kid had to move schools, who fetishizes his black wife's disability until he learned about the truth behind it, and who also cheats on her at the first opportunity. And when she needed it most, he showed her none of the grace and empathy for her that she'd shown him throughout their whole relationship. And yes, I know that some people will obviously view this movie as a wedding that tackles one of America's defining social issues. I'd rather argue that it's more of a movie that uses one of America's defining social issues to explore a wedding. And though the director deplores some imagery, his ultimate thesis is one that dozens of relationship dramas have before. We never really know who we're marrying or who we will be marrying until we've already taken that leap. And so coming to the end of my video, I just want to say that I feel as though the film could have done a way better way of exploring the whole theme of violence and also the horrific nature of the confession that didn't even happen, and how these systems even come to play and how people even think about these sort of things. And yes, because I did analyze the film and do a deep dive for this video, I was able to see specific racial lines, but I think it's very easy to miss that out if you're not looking for it or if it's not obvious in plain sight. And I think that the director and the film production, whoever is in charge, could have done a better job at highlighting those racial differences a bit more clearer, instead of the crew just lazily dipping their toe in the water and saying, yep, that's enough racism for me. I hope my critique on Zendaya enlightened you a bit to how people perceive her, and yes, how she is this mega star, but also examine why and critiques if she actually is paving the way for more black actresses or just paving the way for herself. I just think this movie just shows us that microaggressions can show up in any way, not just work or education, but also in your friendships. And it's not just limited to one factor. So I do urge you to just think about the way you treat people, think about the way it's received on the other end, and don't just always go at it with your feelings and assume that people are going to take what you say how you mean to say it, because there's a lot of history with our language, and we've seen that in recent time that language, no matter the intent, still does cause pain. And so thank you everyone for watching my video. If you've got this far, I don't know, maybe comment a heart or something. I actually don't know. But please do like, comment, and subscribe. As I said, please do feel free to comment. I actually do read my comments. And a recent comment that I got was someone asking for a more European view on my videos. And I was like, European? But yeah, I do live in London, in the UK, which is in Europe. But it's weird because people in the UK don't really class ourselves as in Europe, but that's just a whole like identity politics issue that we got going on over here. But I do have a good perspective being from London and being a Black woman in London. I do read my comments, and I sometimes even respond if I feel like there's something that I miss or something that someone said that I clearly need to clear up. I also want to say that someone else commented that because I live in the UK, I can't talk about films and issues that are based in the US, and that's just complete. Because if I buy a ticket to watch something, I'm allowed to have an opinion on that thing. And so whether the film is based in the US, the UK, Australia, wherever, I'm allowed to have an opinion on it. So whoever that person is, just go. Just go. Do let me know your thoughts on the video. Do let me know what you want me to talk about in my next video. I already have a few ideas, but I just want to see what people are interested in me doing. My two recent videos was on Wumi Masako and the range of dark-skinned romance in media from the movie Sinners, as well as my critique on the range of Black women in trad wife culture. So please do check out my other videos as well. I will link them in the description box below. Do feel free to subscribe to my Substack at Serene the Journalist. Yeah, hopefully I will post another video very soon. Bye.